Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Sabella, and I'm here in Worcester, Massachusetts at the University of Massachusetts Medical School in the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research. I think we're going to go ahead and get started, although I'm sure a couple people will join. We are going to take a few minutes before I introduce our main speaker to just walk through some of the housekeeping items about how to use the software that you guys are using. So please note that this broadcast is being recorded and will be available soon for viewing on the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research's website. We also, I believe, have uploaded a hard copy kind of the slides into the handouts section of the GoToWebinar software, which can be accessed on the right-hand side through that menu, and I'll talk a minute about that. This software, GoToWebinar, works best if you move your electronic handheld devices away from your computer and speakers, and also close other file sharing applications or streaming music or video. They tend to interfere with the software. And then if you are experiencing problems, check your settings in the GoToWebinar audio tab. So depending on how you have your screen set up, on the right-hand side, there should be a set of buttons that usually aren't there, and those are the GoToWebinar or GoToMeeting buttons. You can expand those, and from there, you have different features. You can, do different things. You can adjust your audio and things like that. And if you have technical difficulties that you can't navigate, there's also a questions tab. So if you can see that, please use that or email Dee Logan if you're having trouble, and she will help you troubleshoot live. And speaking of questions, we will have a question and answer session after the presentation. So please, throughout the presentation, we will keep everybody muted, but take time to write in any questions as you think of them in the questions tab, and we'll keep tally on those, and I'll be back to kind of navigate some of those questions and hopefully have a bit of a lively discussion. And last but not least, you could have called in over your internet, your web provider, which might work out fine. Sometimes people have more luck with the calling in over the phone, but just, again, another tip for you in terms of technicalities. So now that we got the housekeeping out of the way, I wanted to just take a minute to introduce this exciting topic. The title of today's webinar is A Challenging Yet Motivating Journey, Experiences of Young Adult Parents with Serious Mental Health Conditions. Emma Pizzitavio is going to be the lead presenter today. Jennifer Whitney has contributed to this as well. She couldn't be here in person, but we do have, she's going to share her story with us, and so we've been able to use technology for her to still do that, even though she couldn't be here. This is a really exciting topic. There's not a lot of research or literature out there, but we do know that these young parents are struggling with many challenges unique to their experiences. And Emma's going to tell us more about them, and I will be back at the end to facilitate discussions. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Catherine, for that introduction. My name is Emma. I work at the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research, and I'm so happy to be here today to talk about the experiences of young adult parents with serious mental health conditions. First, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge our funders, NIDLR and SAMHSA. Without them, we wouldn't be here to present this meaningful research. And also just a moment to acknowledge a few key contributors to this presentation and research project, Catherine Sabella, Laura Golden, and Kathleen Biebel. I thank them hugely for this opportunity to share our findings with you all. So why are we interested in the experiences of young adult parents? Well, as we all know, young adulthood, it's an important time for many significant life transitions as one begins to live independently and make important steps in terms of working and developing a career path, which we all know is very important. And research shows that people with serious mental health conditions tend to become parents at an earlier age on average compared to the general population. So women with mental health conditions are becoming mothers up to 5 years younger than the general population during this very vulnerable time of 19 to 22 years old. Therefore, young people with serious mental health conditions are becoming parents right in the middle of all these important life transitions. And becoming a parent is also a major life event and transition in itself. Research also shows that compared to parents without mental illness, parents living with a serious mental health condition are more likely to be unemployed, living in poverty, dependent on government assistance, and tend to have lower educational attainment. These are very serious economic stressors that can make it difficult first to parent well, but also can get in the way of recovery goals. And despite these poor outcomes, we know very little about the firsthand experiences of parents as they navigate these multiple roles and transitions during young adulthood. So today I'm going to present some of the main themes we found from qualitative interviews with 19 young adult parents living with a mental health condition. And then I will play a recording of Jennifer sharing her personal story and her perspective of what it's like to be a young adult parent living with a mental health condition and navigating challenges. As Catherine said earlier, unfortunately, Jennifer is unable to be here with us today to share her story live, but we were lucky enough to record her piece of the presentation, and we are happy to share that with you. So our findings come from a subsample of a larger study, which we call the CHEER study, which was conducted in the greater Boston, Central Mass area between 2016 and 2017. For the CHEER study, we completed one-time 90-minute interviews with 61 young adults about their mental health experiences, school and work history, and other significant life events such as incarceration and homelessness. And then we're also interested in understanding the experience of young adult parents specifically, and for this reason we purposefully oversampled, so about a third of the sample were parents. And we ended up with a subsample of 19 young adult parents. They were asked additional questions, including changes in activities after becoming a parent, custody and living arrangements, as well as challenges and supports related to parenting. So for the remainder of this presentation, I will be focusing only on this subsample of 19 young parents. And in order to be eligible for the CHEER study, young adult parents had to be between the ages of 22 and 30, had to be diagnosed with at least one of the following mental health conditions listed, and had to report experiencing a significant disruption or life impact due to mental health, such as an inpatient hospitalization. And they also had to have just some minimal school and work history for the interview. And it's worth mentioning that we did have some challenges recruiting parents for the study, and we needed to use outreach methods that are outside of our typical recruitment avenues, which tend to include mental health agencies and clubhouses in order to find these young adult parents. And a majority of our parent sample were recruited through social service agencies and parent support centers in the area. And we interpret these recruitment challenges to be that young adult parents might not be accessing these traditional mental health services, at least not to the extent that non-parents are. And just to quickly review our analyses procedures, most of the interviews were recorded and then transcribed. We used the coding software called Deduce for coding and analysis, and our qualitative analysis process was guided by grounded theory, in which we looked for themes across all interviews and developed a code book that went through an extensive revision process. And then together, Catherine, Laura, and I coded the transcripts and met as a group for several months to interpret the coded data. So before I dive into the qualitative themes, I first want to describe a little bit about the young adult parents that we interviewed. So the majority of the sample of young parents were white and not Hispanic or Latino. The average age was 26 years old. And the majority of participants that we interviewed were mothers. However, we were able to interview 3 dads. And we recognize that the lack of diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, and gender in our sample is a limitation of the study. However, as I mentioned earlier, it was a challenge to get these young parents, and we are happy with the spectrum of experiences that we were able to capture with our limited resources. So most participants became a parent before the age of 25, and a little less than half, 42%, became parents before the age of 20. Some pregnancies were planned, but most of them were not. And a majority had just 1 or 2 children, and the average age of their children was 5 years old. So 42%, a little less than half of the sample, had achieved a high school diploma or GED as their highest level of education. About half had then gone on to attempt college, but only 16% completed a post-secondary degree. And a few were currently in college working towards a degree at the time of the interview, but unfortunately many had attempted college but either dropped out or didn't finish for a number of reasons. So based on what we know about economic outcomes for parents with mental illness, it's not surprising, but still very concerning that over half of the parent sample were making less than $10,000 a year. However, please note that this does not include financial assistance such as SSI or SSDI, so the annual income might be slightly skewed. However, it's definitely still very alarming that many of the young parents we interviewed were living at poverty levels. So now I will summarize some of the main themes that we found throughout our interview with these 19 parents. So 14 out of the 16 mothers that we interviewed had primary custody of their children. The 2 that did not have custody, the grandparents had custody, and in both of those cases, the mother was living in the home with the grandparents and their child, and they were actively, at that time, playing a major role in their child's life. And over half of the sample of parents that we interviewed were single mothers, and I was really inspired and kind of in awe at the resiliency of these single moms as they were able to take on so much to take care of themselves and their children. And one single mother says, "I am mom and I am dad, so I have to look out for her safety and her well-being all the time and cook dinner and laundry and everything." And of the 3 dads that we interviewed, only 1 had partial custody of his children, and he was able to see his children every week. And when we asked him what his major success was as a parent, he replied, just being there for them and spending time with them, as much time as he could spend with them. And then the other 2 dads, unfortunately, did not have custody, and they hadn't seen their child in a number of years. One dad experienced a traumatic custody battle, which I will talk about a little later in the presentation. And he said, "I haven't seen my son in 8 years. It's been very, very difficult." And the other dad, he hadn't seen his son in about 2 years, and that was mainly due to incarceration. But he said, "Even though there's no restriction on my visitation, the mother refuses to let me see my son, and the fact that I'm not there really hurts him." And so I think it's important to note that all 3 dads did express that being a part of their child's lives was important to them and that it was something that they wanted. So the 3 major challenges that the parents we interviewed described were co-parenting, lack of childcare, and homelessness or housing instability. So many of the parents were navigating complex relationships with the other parent, That relationship was often described as stressful or unhealthy or manipulative, and it tended to be a source of stress for these parents. And for many of the single mothers, the fathers of their children were often around for the first year of their child's life and then became more and more uninvolved over time. And lack of childcare was a huge challenge. Daycare is very expensive. Some young parents were able to acquire daycare vouchers, but that process was difficult. Often it was the grandparents that helped the most with childcare, and other family members helped too, mainly siblings. And the family members would often watch their children so that the parent could go to work. And some single mothers expressed that they were unable to work because they had no one reliable to watch their children. So lack of childcare was a huge barrier to work, to finding work and sustaining work. And then this was typically related to a lack of support system and having no one trustworthy to watch their kids. And then homelessness and housing instability was unfortunately a common theme. Some participants had experienced homelessness while living with their children. And so there was actually 3 mothers who were living in homeless shelters at the time of the interview. And then others, had experienced unstable housing, which caused them to be separated from their child for a period of time, which caused increased depression and other mental health symptoms. And one young mom who was separated from her daughter for a period of time due to not having a safe living environment. She said in the interview, I was just really depressed. I was in a trance. I didn't feel like myself, not without my kid. I didn't feel like I was accountable for anything. And you may realize that a lot of these challenges are challenges that one might expect many parents would face. And often, at least what I found, is the case that poverty and lack of resources, lack of a support system are bigger problems than mental health. And having social and familial support helped overcome many of these challenges. So one of the most prominent findings was that caring for children was a huge motivator for these young adult parents. They would frequently describe their child as giving them a sense of purpose or meaning, a reason to get out of bed in the morning, a source of motivation that's outside of themselves. And during episodes of depression and other mental health issues, caring for their child was an important reason to keep moving. One young mom says, I refuse to not be able to provide for my son. I've been super determined. Even though I have my depression and my anxiety, I still go forward. And children were motivators for personal recovery and well-being, but also motivators just to make the parents want to better themselves in general. So caring for children helped them maintain sobriety and avoid risky behaviors to ensure that they could have custody of their child. One young mom expressed how she's like, I just can't be crazy as I was anymore because I don't want to risk going to jail. I need to be there for my child. It's just not an option anymore. And caring for child also motivated some young parents to want to build a career and develop career ambitions. One young mom said, I knew I wanted to be a role model for her, so that's why I went to school, talking about how having her daughter helped her push her in the direction of building a career and going back to school. And finally, children helped these young parents feel a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives. Another important theme I wanted to shed light on is fear of discrimination or judgments that unfortunately is typical for most people with mental health conditions, but it's especially relevant for parents. And stigma is definitely a reality for parents that are living with a serious mental health condition. One young dad that I mentioned earlier experienced discrimination in court. At age 19, he went through a lengthy custody battle with the mother of his son, in which his mental health was used against him in court. And at one point, it was put in the court stipulation that he had to take pictures of himself taking his medication every day and send them to the mother, because their point was, well, we need to know that you're taking your medication. And thankfully, he had a Department of Mental Health caseworker that was really great and was like, no, that's discrimination, like, that's not going to happen, that can't happen, and helped him fight against that. But after the long and traumatic custody battle, he ended up with no custody, no visitation or anything, and he was not allowed to see his son. And when talking about that experience, he says, I've definitely been discriminated against by the judge. It was horrible. They'd talk to me like I was 5. They looked at me like I was a disease of a father. I wanted to be there for my kid, but was never given the opportunity by the courts to do it. And I wanted to share his story because I think it's important to acknowledge the experience of parents who do not have custody or lost custody, and just acknowledge the severe impact that it has on their lives and their mental well-being. For this young dad, this experience still affects him today, and he's been in therapy for years trying to cope with not only the discrimination, but the loss of his child. And often young men are not being asked about their experiences being a father, and I think it's important to talk to them in order to find out what could be helpful for fathers. And finally, before I get to Jennifer's story, I want to end with a quote from a young mom. She wants to remind us that having a mental illness and being a parent is possible. If you have PTSD, it doesn't mean your child is going to go through that with you. It doesn't mean you're bad. You can still be a great parent regardless of your mental illness. So I thank her for that quote. And with that, I will transition to sharing Jennifer's story with you. If you just bear with me for 1 minute, I will get that set up.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Whitney. I'm so sorry that I couldn't be here today. Today I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my journey being a young adult mom, and also I have a serious mental health condition. So a bit about my background. I became a young adult mother when I was 21 years old. I was in a relationship for about 2.5 years of that time, and for the past 4 years I have been a single parent. The relationship between my daughter's dad and I, her name is Emily, Emily is 6 years old, has been a little rocky. Co-parenting is a very difficult thing for us, but we try to do it the best we can every single day. So Emily, like I said, is 6 years old. She has been a great little girl. She has been my rock. She is my motivation every single day, and we make a great team. Not every day is easy, but it's possible. And with it being possible, I've had a lot of support. And one of my main supports is my mom, which is also Emily's Mimi. So my mom, with being a support and also having the support of a lot of my friends and my coworkers, with being a young mom, has been so supported by them. So going into being a young adult mom, I've come across a lot of stigma regarding it, and also disclosure as being a young adult parent. Being a young adult parent with a mental health condition can be very stigmatizing across the board. Disclosing to and trusting and opening up to service providers has been very hard. And with that being said, recently, it's hard for me to talk about, but I was investigated by the Department of Children and Families, also known as DCF, because of my mental health condition. It was a very, very traumatic experience. I felt so judged and discriminated against, and I've always felt like I was going to lose my child. And every single day, it's just been a fear, and I've been trying so hard to just think positive. It's hard to be so stigmatized against it, especially because of mental health, because, I am getting up every day, I am doing things, but these challenges have only made me a stronger person. And with that being said, right now they had to do an assessment on me to see if everything was okay, to see if all my service providers were in place. And with that being said, right now the case regarding the Department of Children and Families against me regarding my mental health condition is submitted to be closed. I still have not heard anything about if the supervisor, because it had to go to the supervisor to be officially closed, but hopefully I'll hear about that in the next week. So on a positive note, here's a picture of Emily and I recently at her reading ceremony. Not reading ceremony, but it was she got a reading award for reading. She was 1 out of 3 students. And I also got a quick email from our teacher randomly one night, just stating that she goes, "Hi, Jennifer, I just wanted to send you a quick email about Emily. I'm very proud of how much progress she is making, and she has been working very hard with her reading and writing. She's been a great helper, too. She's doing great." Getting that email, I felt on top of the world. I felt like I am doing it as a parent. Like, I've struggled the last 6 years being a young mom and managing stuff and managing my life and just trying to be there for Emily, and knowing that I'm doing it. Like, this email that I got, brief email at 9:30 at night, was like, wow, this is great. Like, I can actually do it. I can actually manage things. And I'm very proud of my daughter, Emily. I'm proud of myself for doing it every single day. So parenting and recovery. So my number one priority is to make sure I always take care of myself so I can be the best role model for my daughter. So that's my number one thing, because if I can't be there for Emily right away, I need to be there for myself. So throughout the years of taking care of Emily, I continued to sustain a job for over 8 years at the transition center, and I could not thank them enough. They've had so many accommodations regarding if I needed to leave early for childcare or take a day off if Emily's sick. They've been a great support to me and to my life. I can't thank them enough. Also, with going to therapy consistently and making sure that I take my medication and that I have my self-care, and also maintaining relationships with my friends and family is also important, and they've been such a blessing to Emily and I. And it's amazing to have that constant support. You know, I am, and I realize that I am truly blessed of the people around me and the people who care about Emily and I, and it makes me tear up that I can do this not only for myself but for my daughter. But you know, just a closing point is, you know, even though you're taking care of a child and you're you have those moments of struggling, is know that you can do it, know that you can survive. Like, I call myself a survivor, like I'm doing it, and I'm unstoppable, and I feel like I can do this, and that nothing is going to stop me, and knowing that I have all that support. Thank you so much, and I hope this presentation has made a difference, and you've had some insight on what it's like being a young adult parent and the challenges and also the positives of it.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. I know she isn't here, but I definitely want to thank her for her contributions. Hopefully everyone could hear the recording okay. I just want to make some concluding points. So this research is exploratory, and we're really just starting to think about this population and starting to understand the stories of young adult parents, and not just the outcomes, but the experiences as well. And we believe that, talking firsthand to young parents about their experiences can start the conversation about how to best serve them and support them. And personal narratives, we believe, can provide important insight on the lives of parents living with serious mental health conditions. We found that parenting, although stressful, presents an opportunity for motivation and can positively impact one's personal recovery. And we found that often poverty and housing instabilities are the greater challenges compared to mental health symptoms. Though future research is definitely needed to further untangle this relationship between economic status, serious mental health conditions, and parenting challenges. And this research has implications to support young adult parents. Housing supports, as well as employment and education supports, may be especially beneficial for young parents living with mental health conditions. And providers, they should be aware of their clients who are parents and use this meaningful role to take advantage of that motivating force and integrate it into their care. And then finally, just acknowledging and recognizing one's stigma and judgments, and normalizing some of the challenges that parents face. We did ask our young adult parent sample about how they see their mental health impacting them as a parent. And what they shared with us is they're like, oh, well, sometimes I get tired and I don't have the motivation to get up and play. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that, everyone.
Yes, it should be better.
Okay, it should be better. Sorry about that, everyone. So closing point, some young parents, they tend to, interpret some of these normal challenges, such as, feeling too tired to play with their children, or feeling drained, or, feeling nervous when they're away from their children, that sort of thing. They seem to attribute that to their mental health condition. But when in reality, I was talking to Kate Biebel about this, and she's like, well, those are things that all parents face, and those are challenges that all parents experience. And so I think just kind of taking a step back and just normalizing some of these things can be a huge impact on the way that they view themselves and their recovery moving forward, so that they can, we can better support them and their children. And then I also wanted to include some resources for parenting. We included both local resources in the Central Mass area and also some national resources as well. The first one is Healthy Families, which was actually recommended by one of our participants as helping her get connected to therapy, and you know, she had a home visitor come, and she got help with bus passes and diapers and wipes and clothes and stuff like that, and she definitely recommends that as a helpful support. SMOC is also another one in the area that's very helpful. And then this link to Wayside has a number of different services for parents as well that are in the area. And then for national resources, the Temple Collaborative has done a lot of work on parenting with mental illness, and they have several helpful resources on their website. Psych Central is a good source for parenting and mental health in general, not necessarily young parents, but single parents, and self-care tips, stuff like that. This was a support that was recommended by Jennifer Whitney, the other presenter. And then also just the National Parent Helpline as well. So thank you all so much. I'm going to hand this back over to Catherine Sabella, who's going to walk us through some of the questions and answers.
Hi everyone, it's Catherine again. Again, brief apologies for the technical difficulties, even though we had practiced this. Some things threw off our flow there, so apologies for that. I am looking to see if we have any questions, and it doesn't look like any questions came through.
We do have a few questions, Catherine. I can read them off while you're trying to access them.
Yeah, thank you.
The first one is, were there any parenting supports available to these parents in their educational setting?
Thanks for that, Dee. Supports in their educational setting. Well, interestingly, the original larger study, the CHEER study, did look at originally intended to understand education and employment experiences of young adults generally. Most of these young adults, and Emma, correct me if I'm wrong, gave birth after they were out of high school. So they weren't necessarily in high school when they gave birth. And then many of them were struggling to go back to education or training because of the child care issue. So they weren't receiving supports in school settings, so they weren't in school settings. And many of them, I think, while they expressed interest in going back to school, hadn't yet. Do you remember any themes regarding educational support for the parents themselves?
So a lot of the parents that we interviewed were not seeking post-secondary education, but there were a few. I think I can specifically remember one mother who was balancing a newborn and school and part-time work, and I don't think she was seeking any formal supports at her school. She did mention transferring to a different school that was closer to her home, but I don't know. I think one of the findings from the larger CHEER study is that not many young people are disclosing their mental health conditions, especially in these formal settings. So not many were really seeking any accommodations in college or anything like that. And I think that is largely to do with this fear of discrimination and fear of judgment. Does that answer the question?
Good. I'm able to see the questions now. Dee, thank you, and Allie, thank you. So I'm skipping one question. Somebody else also asked what kinds of natural supports beyond family did some of these parents have. And Emma can go back to that support slide. I definitely was struck myself about how the family of origin parents / grandparents were most cited as being resources. But like Emma said, in terms of local supports, even while we were trying to recruit and find young parents to be in this study, it became clear that we weren't recruiting from the typical channels. We had been recruiting from community mental health organizations, and they just weren't there. And so some of the resources that Emma had put up on the screen were definitely helpful. So the Healthy Families in Mass. There's also family resource centers in Massachusetts, and we're sorry this slide is not showing up correctly. So family resources centers, FRCs, are definitely helpful. Emma mentioned SMHC, which is the Southern Middlesex Opportunity Center. Those agencies, while they have a family focus, definitely were kind of a multi-pronged approach to service provision for families that were struggling and or for young parents or any parents with mental illness, I believe. And so they were kind of a coordinated care kind of model. And again, a little bit of that one-stop shopping. So again, I think Emma had talked about one young woman that talked about, well, they helped me out with food stamps, and then they also helped me find an internship, and then they also explained to me like where I could look for affordable housing. And so I think it was really the supports beyond just the primary family of origin or their own kind of parents or siblings in some cases. I think the second most common support were these general service provisions that really gave them access not just to mental health treatment, but also to these other more social supports.
Yeah, and I would just add that when we were doing a Google search of different supports in the area, and we found that a lot of young parenting supports tended to put the age gap at 22 years old, which so that was one of the reasons why we were interested in interviewing this population of young adults who are kind of out of that age range and what supports they are using when they age out of services.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Emma. Back to that question even about educational supports. When we were developing this study, a lot of the research that has been done on young adult parenting is on the teen parenting kind of realm, which is important, absolutely. But these young adults who are becoming parents at even 21, 22, 23, without completing post-secondary schooling or training or having stable jobs, without a strong social network, I mean, they're struggling as well. And it was really kind of frustrating to find this, what looked like a really cool service or agency in the area, and then to find out that they cut off services at 21 or 22. I think there are obviously adult, family resources for older parents with mental illness or just with any complex needs. But again, our work here at the Transitions ACR has shown that young adult tailored programming is much more effective in engaging young adults. So I think that's a gap in our current array of services, at least in central Massachusetts. Somebody else also asked about peer supports, and I didn't hear too many parents in the sample talk about either experiencing a young adult peer mentor that was like them or wishing they had one. But I could see it being a theme. It just didn't come out necessarily. Do you remember?
So we didn't specifically ask them about peer supports related to parenting, but there were a few participants that we interviewed that were peer mentors themselves. And specifically the quote about how being a parent with mental illness is possible. She is a peer mentor in the community and expressed that when in her work, a lot of parents that she worked with, young adult parents, or even just young adults in general, they're like, oh, I don't want to, they were feeling kind of shame and nervousness about having children, and feeling that their mental health condition would impact them as a parent. And I think, she definitely touched on that a little bit. I think I'm a huge fan of peer support, and I wish we did ask a little bit more about that, because I think that is an interesting topic related to parenting. Definitely.
Yeah. So thank you for these questions. Oh yes, somebody is correcting us too that the FRCs, the Family Resource Centers in Massachusetts, have parent partners as a member of their staff and team. So thank you so much, and apologies if that Family Resource Center did not get on this resource slide. Plus, this resource slide is a little iffy, but we will edit those before we post the slides. So thank you for that, Barbara. So then somebody asked a little earlier, were these young adult parents given encouragement by their mental health service providers to disclose their treatment challenges to their families of origin? It's an interesting question. I don't think it's a theme or a concept that came up too much. I have the impression from both these interviews and from my interactions with other young adults and looking at the literature on parents, i.e. older parents with mental illness, that the family component, or the role of mother or father with mental illness, is not talked about very much in the service provision, so that even in their own mental health treatment, they are not necessarily coached and or talking about how to discuss with either their children or their own parents how to talk about the mental illness. But it wasn't really a prominent theme per se. I'm always a big proponent of, if you're struggling, you should be sharing that. But I think also many young adults struggle to share things strategically and or, like Emma said, the stigma associated with it. In Jen's case, her personal story, when DCF had opened that case on her, she was very hurt by that because she had trusted many of her providers that she's been working with, her and her daughter. So again, it was this kind of example of that stigma and or the results of sharing sometimes, hey, I'm struggling with this role, either with your own parents or with your therapist or some other service provider, does have almost that associated risk of leading to something. So I think that's a really fine line that many parents with mental illness, regardless of their own age, are probably navigating.
Catherine and Emma, you may not be able to answer this question, but I was curious if when you were doing the qualitative interviews, if you asked the young adult parents or even the other participants if they wanted support services and if they gave ideas for what would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Dee. We did ask most participants, again, in a qualitative interview, you're not asking the same questions all the time. We did ask them most what would have been helpful that they did not receive. Do you remember any themes from the parent sample or the general?
Yeah, I think from the parent sample, definitely daycare, affordable daycare vouchers came up a lot as something that would be helpful, just so someone could watch their kids while they worked. It's kind of, it goes, it's kind of
a normative
challenge. Yeah. One young mom mentioned that having a home visit, a therapist visit her home would be helpful. Therefore, she didn't have to arrange for a babysitter or something like that. I think having children, it's a barrier to getting yourself help, or it can be, because, you need someone to be able to watch your children while you go to appointments and whatnot. But
yeah, I think, and if Jen was here, and I hate to speak for her, but because I won't do it justice, but I know she would probably speak about the challenges around getting out of the house. And somebody just commented the transportation alone is really difficult. The idea of putting her and her child on the public bus in Worcester, you know, in the middle of winter, those kinds of things. And I also know, even in Jen's experiences more recently, that linkage to services is sometimes helpful. I do remember interviewing one young parent who just it's almost like you don't know what you don't know, that saying, like they didn't know they could get child care vouchers. They didn't know they qualified for food stamps. It's kind of just getting access to that knowledge and not even knowing what the questions are to ask. And that's, again, where more of a coordinated care kind of model or system of care approach is really helpful to have, you know, an agency that can kind of help that young person navigate all those different areas of living, not just the mental health piece. And so supports available, somebody's asking about resources or supports that are available. Again, we put up a few in Massachusetts. Did we have a national slide? National resources. The nationalparenthelpline.org is definitely a really good source. Some colleagues of ours at Temple Collaborative. The website is tucollaborative.org/parenting. They've done a lot of work on parenting with mental illness, and they have several helpful resources or toolkits or tool guides. There's also another website called psychcentral.com, which has tips for parenting with a mental illness, and it's a good source for parenting and mental health in general, not necessarily for young parents, but just single parents or steps to take care of yourself. You know, as Emma just noted, or I noted, some of those challenges are somewhat normative that many parents are facing, myself included, in terms of the challenge of daycare and things like that. But these young adults with mental health conditions are sometimes often navigating many multiple challenges. And I think our point in exploring a lot of this was to really understand their experiences to inform services. So I don't think we're coming out of here with really concrete suggestions necessarily, but also just informing the community that their needs, the needs of young adults and young parents with mental illnesses, might be a bit more unique than older adults. And lastly, somebody did comment about cultural factors that you found that affected the young parents. I mean, again, I think the social network piece was really important, meaning most of them had either their own mother or a sibling who was helping them with the child care. As Emma mentioned, unfortunately, our sample was largely white and largely female, so there's not enough data really to kind of even make too many generalizations about what the needs of young parents with mental illness who happen to be of different racial and ethnic backgrounds. I think that would definitely be a next logical step for some of this research. And then in terms of, you know, socioeconomic indicators, as Emma indicated, their own personal income was pretty low. One regret is that we didn't ask or measure very well, like their socioeconomic status growing up. So I think there did seem to be, most of the young parents were low income, struggling again with those basic needs in terms of housing and shelter and transportation and things like that. So I do think we see some of that confluence as well. I'm mindful of everybody's time. It's already a minute after, so we've had some people start signing off. So again, I really appreciate everybody coming. Emma, thank you for a very good presentation, and thanks for handling those technical difficulties. They always seem to pop up. Thank you, everybody out there, for your patience. I hope you've learned something new. If you have questions, you can email Emma or myself. Here is a way to keep in touch with us, both our website, or you can text us to join our mailing list. The slides were given out and uploaded in the handout section of your GoToWebinar, but we will also post the full recording on the website that's listed there, umassmed.edu/transitionsacr, so you can review it or share it with colleagues. I think in the end, Emma and I just think this is a really interesting and important population that services and supports need to better support. So we are appreciative of our opportunity to kind of talk to some of these young adults and find out more about what they've been going through. Thank you, Emma. Any final comments?
No, just thank you everyone so much for listening.
Great. All right, everybody, have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you, Catherine, Emma, and Jen. I just wanted to do a quick plug for our next Transitions ACR webinar coming up on October 10th. It will look at the college year, how students with lived experience navigate academics and mental health management. If you haven't registered, you can go to our website and register, or you can go and join our mailing list and you'll get a notification about it. And thank you everyone so much. Have a wonderful day.